My husband of 25 years. The man I spent every waking hour building a multi-million-dollar empire for. Handed me a gold envelope on our anniversary. I thought it was a plane ticket for a surprise vacation. But inside was a petition for divorce. He told me I was expired, and that his 22-year-old assistant was the newer model he needed for his future. He thought I was just a clueless housewife who didn't understand business. He forgot that I was the one who wrote every patent he owns. I am the landlord of the very land his factory sits on. And I am the one who holds the keys to the vault he's been stealing from. Welcome to Revenge in Sight. This is the story of the silent architect. 25 years ago. The world was a very different place for Martha and Greg. They didn't have a penny to their names. And their only asset was a shared dream and a relentless work ethic. They lived in a cramped, drafty basement apartment where the heater barely worked, and they had to share a single bowl of ramen for dinner most nights. Greg was the dreamer. The charismatic talker who could sell ice to an Eskimo. He had the vision, the charm, and the ability to walk into any room and command attention. But Martha was the brain. The silent force of nature that turned those dreams into reality. Martha was a brilliant structural engineer who had left her promising career to help Greg start Sterling Tech. In those early grueling years, Martha was the one who stayed up until 3 a.m., sitting under a single dim light, drawing the blueprints and writing the complex code for their very first patent. She was the one who managed the books, ensuring every single cent was stretched to its absolute limit. She was the silent architect behind every successful deal Greg ever made. While Greg was out shaking hands and making promises, Martha was in the back room, making sure those promises could actually be kept. But as the company grew from a small startup into a global giant, and the zeros in their bank account began to multiply, Greg's memory began to fail him in the worst way possible. He started to believe his own hype. He began to think that he was the sole reason for their success, the lone genius who had conquered the tech world. He encouraged Martha to step back, to enjoy the fruits of her labor as a high society wife. He told her she deserved a rest, that she should spend her time at charity galas and country clubs. Martha, wanting to support her husband's growing ego and keep the peace in their home, did exactly that. She traded her blueprints for designer gala invitations, and her lab coat for expensive silk dresses. She attended the parties, she hosted the dinners, and she played the part of the supportive, quiet wife to perfection. She thought they were still a team, two halves of a whole. She had no idea that while she was picking out flowers for their garden, Greg was already meeting with lawyers to find a way to dissolve their partnership without giving her a dime. The change in Greg wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, toxic transformation that Martha tried to ignore for as long as she could. He started coming home later and later, smelling of expensive, heavy cologne and a floral scent that Martha didn't recognize from her own vanity. He grew impatient with her, mocking her old-fashioned engineering ideas and telling her she was out of touch with the modern, fast-paced market. Every time she tried to talk about the business, he would shut her down, telling her to go buy a new handbag and let the men handle the real work. Then came Chloe. Chloe was 22, blonde, and had a smile that was as artificial as her polished resume. Greg hired her as his executive assistant, but the entire office knew the real nature of her job within the first week. Martha saw the way they looked at each other at the company's Christmas party. A sickening mix of lust on Greg's part and calculated arrogance on Chloe's. Greg looked at Chloe as if she were a trophy, a symbol of his youth and vitality, while he looked at Martha as if she were a piece of old equipment that was taking up too much space. Martha kept her silence, waiting, hoping that Greg would eventually realize his mistake and come back to the woman who had built him. But the realization never came. On their 25th anniversary, a day that should have been a celebration of their shared history, Greg took Martha to the city's most exclusive rooftop restaurant. He looked across the table at her and handed her a gold-foiled envelope. Martha's heart actually fluttered with hope. She thought he was finally coming back to her. Perhaps a trip to Paris to rediscover their love. But when she opened the envelope, she didn't see an invitation to travel. She saw a petition for divorce and a settlement offer that was a slap in the face to the 25 years of blood, sweat, and tears she had sacrificed. "You're expired, Martha," Greg said, his voice cold, flat, and devoid of any human emotion. "Chloe is the future. I need someone who looks good on my arm at the international board meetings. Someone who reflects the modern image of this company. Not someone who reminds me of a basement apartment and late-night blueprints. You should take the money and go quietly. Don't make this embarrassing for yourself." Martha didn't cry. She didn't scream. And she certainly didn't throw her vintage wine in his smug, arrogant face. She simply looked at the man she had built from nothing and realized he was nothing more than a house of cards held together by her own brilliance. She signed nothing. She didn't even acknowledge the papers. She simply stood up, walked out of that restaurant with her head held high, and instead of going back to their cold, empty mansion, she went to her old office. This wasn't the glass-walled office on the top floor. It was the secret one she had maintained for decades in the basement of the Sterling Tech headquarters. It was the only room in the building Greg never entered because it reminded him of his humble beginnings. Greg had forgotten that while he was out buying sports cars and impressing his young gold-digging mistress, Martha had remained the legal administrator for all the company's intellectual property. She was the one who managed the renewals, the filings, and the fine print. She sat at her desk, her fingers flying across the keys with a speed Greg didn't even know she possessed. She began to pull the threads of the empire. She discovered that Greg had been laundering massive company funds into a private account for Chloe, thinking he was being clever by hiding it behind a series of shell companies. He thought he was playing a master game of chess, but he was playing against the person who had designed the board. But Greg had made one fatal, irreversible mistake. He had used a shell company to buy the land for their newest $3 billion automated factory. He assumed that because he was the CEO, he owned that shell company. But Martha, the woman he called out of touch, had registered that land in a private family trust, a trust that only she had the sole power to dissolve or modify. "He thinks I'm just a housewife," Martha whispered to the empty, shadowed room, her eyes glowing with a sharp, lethal intelligence that had been suppressed for too many years. "He thinks I'm a relic of his past. He's about to find out that I am his landlord, his auditor, and his executioner." The strike was surgical, precise, and utterly devastating. Martha didn't bother calling a divorce lawyer first. She didn't want a settlement. She wanted her life back. She called a forensic accountant and a top-tier patent attorney. Within 48 hours, she had used her legal standing as the IP administrator to freeze the royalties on the 3 primary patents that funded 80% of Sterling Tech's total revenue. Greg didn't even notice at first. He was too busy taking Chloe on a celebration shopping spree in Milan, bragging to her about how he had finally cleared the dead weight from his life. When he returned, he found the digital locks on his executive office changed. "What is the meaning of this?" Greg screamed at the security guards in the lobby, his face turning a deep, angry shade of purple. "I am the CEO. Open this door immediately," Mr. Sterling, the head of security, said. a man Martha had personally hired and looked after for 10 years. The board has received a formal documented complaint regarding the massive embezzlement of company funds to a private account held by a Ms. Chloe Vance. Until the forensic audit is complete, your access to the building and all company accounts is officially revoked. Greg laughed, a hollow panic sound, thinking it was some kind of elaborate joke. I own this company. I built it with my bare hands. Actually, Greg, Martha's voice came over the intercom, steady and cold as a winter morning. I own the patents that make this company run. I own the land this building sits on. And I own the very desk you're standing near. You were always just the face of the brand, Greg. You were the marketing department. I am the engineering. And today, the brand is under new management. Greg's world began to shake beneath his feet. For the first time in 25 years, he felt the cold, hard, terrifying reality of a world without Martha's silent protection. Greg was desperate. He had already promised Chloe a $5 million wedding in the Maldives. And he had used his company shares as collateral for a massive bank loan to buy a new private jet to impress her. With the patents frozen and the company under audit, his shares were becoming worthless by the hour. He decided to go to the annual Tech Leaders Gala, hoping to use his charm to secure a new investor and save his skin before the board officially voted him out. He walked onto the red carpet with Chloe on his arm, trying to look like the powerful, untouchable billionaire the world thought he was. He forced a smile for the cameras, but his hands were shaking. Inside the ballroom, the room went quiet when he entered, but people weren't looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at the stage. Martha was standing there, wearing a tailored navy blue suit that made her look like the queen she truly was. She wasn't the quiet wife tonight. She was being honored as the innovator of the decade. The crowd was cheering for the woman Greg had tried to discard as expired. I'd like to introduce my new business partner, Martha announced into the microphone, her voice carrying through the room with absolute authority. She looked directly at Greg and Chloe, who were standing frozen near the bar. He's a specialist in forensic finance and corporate fraud, and he has a very interesting report regarding the fraudulent activities of our former CEO, Greg Sterling. The room erupted in a storm of whispers and gasps. The police, who had been waiting in the back of the ballroom, began to move in. Chloe, seeing the handcuffs and the flashing cameras, didn't stay to defend her future. She turned and ran through the side exit, leaving Greg to face the investigators, the press, and the crushing weight of his own lies, alone. The downfall was total and merciless. Because the land for the main automated factory was held in Martha's private trust, she initiated an immediate eviction notice against Sterling Tech. To save the company from complete collapse, the board of directors had to force Greg to sign over every single one of his remaining shares to Martha, in exchange for her not pressing full criminal charges for the embezzlement. Greg had no choice. He signed the papers with a trembling hand, his eyes filled with a mixture of rage and disbelief. In an instant, he was left with nothing. The $50 million mansion was repossessed because it was owned by a company subsidiary. The fleet of sports cars was sold at auction to pay off his bank loans. Even the gold watch he was so proud of, the one he thought made him a man of status, was taken to settle his outstanding debts. Martha watched from the window of her new glass penthouse as Greg moved his few remaining belongings, mostly old clothes and broken dreams, into a small rented one-bedroom apartment in the same rundown district where they had started 25 years ago. It was a poetic justice that Greg was too blind to see. Chloe was long gone. She had found a new future with a younger, less complicated heir within 48 hours, leaving Greg with nothing but the bitter, cold memory of his own arrogance. Greg tried to call Martha dozens of times, begging for a meeting, crying on her voicemail. "Martha, please. I made a mistake. We were a team. I was stressed. Let's just talk. For old time's sake." Martha didn't answer a single call. She didn't send a single text. She simply blocked his number and went back to her new blueprints. She had spent 25 years building his life. She took less than 25 days to take it all back. Martha rebranded the entire company within a month. Sterling Tech became Martha Sterling Innovations. She hired back the senior engineers Greg had fired because they were too old or too expensive. She restored the company's integrity, and within a year, the annual revenue had tripled. She was no longer the silent architect. She was the face, the brain, and the soul of the empire. She was on the cover of every major business magazine, recognized finally for the work she had been doing all along. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, while walking through the city park, she saw a man sitting on a bench. He was wearing a worn-out, stained coat, looking at a job flyer for a junior sales position at a local car dealership. He looked 20 years older than he was. He looked broken, tired, and hollow. He looked exactly like the expired model he had accused her of being. He saw her, and for a split second, there was a spark of hope in his eyes. He stood up, clutching his flyer. "Martha," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Is that really you?" Martha didn't stop. She didn't even slow her pace. She didn't look at him with hatred. She looked at him with the same indifference one has for a stranger on the street. She simply walked past him, her head held high, her future bright, and her legacy secure. She had repaid him with interest, not because she was a cruel woman, but because she understood the ultimate law of engineering. If the foundation of a life is built on a lie, the entire structure will eventually, inevitably, fall. The penthouse was quiet, save for the soft humming of the city below. Martha stood on her balcony, looking out at the skyline she had conquered. She felt no regret for what she had done. She felt no lingering anger toward the man on the park bench. She only felt the profound, peaceful satisfaction of a woman who had reclaimed her own power and her own voice. She had learned the most valuable lesson of all: that some people are meant to be a chapter in your life, but they are never meant to be the whole book. Greg was a hard lesson she had to learn, a fire she had to walk through to finally find her own strength. She looked at the new blueprints on her mahogany desk, the revolutionary designs for a sustainable city that would change the way people lived. She was 75% done with the first phase of the project. She smiled to herself, a genuine warm smile. She was no longer building for Greg's ego. She was no longer building for someone else's glory. She was building for herself, and for the future she believed in. As the stars began to twinkle over the city skyline, Martha Sterling realized that she hadn't just repossessed her life. She had finally truly begun to live it. The silent architect was silent no more. Her legacy wasn't just in the bricks and mortar. It was in the resilience of her spirit. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been engineered to perfection. Thank you for watching this tale of resilience and the ultimate repossession on Revenge Insight. Martha Sterling's story is a powerful reminder that you should never underestimate the person who built your foundation. What did you think of Martha's surgical strike? Was she right to take everything back? Or should she have left Greg with something after 25 years? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe that the brain is always more powerful than the face, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more epic stories of justice. Stay wise, stay strong, and always protect your own blueprints. Until next time.